As we prepare to bid adieu to the PS4 and hop on board the next-gen train, the time is right to look back at the life of Sony's 8th generation console. All told, the PS4 had a tremendous life. They promised greatness, and surely they delivered it. It started out slow for sure, as new consoles generally tend to, but over the years it continued to gather steam. And now as we stand at the close and look back at the PS4, it's not hard to be wowed by its spectacular library, which delivers in terms of both quality and quantity with absolute gems from all genres made by developers big and small. Sony's first-party exclusives and third-party developers who'd pledged exclusivity to the console had a huge role to play in that, and the number of excellent exclusives the PS4 boasts is frankly staggering. And in this feature, we're going to talk about the 30 best games that, if you play your games on consoles, you can only find on the PS4, starting with number 30 and counting down to what we feel is the best of the bunch. Number 30, KILLZONE Shadowfall. The KILLZONE series is one of ups and downs, and KILLZONE Shadowfall is definitely not nearly as good as, say, something like KILLZONE 2, but it was a solid enough entry into Guerrilla Games' first-person shooter franchise to kick things off for the PS4 era, delivering stunning graphics to show the prowess of Sony's shiny new console, a solid multiplayer component, and making some interesting changes for more open-ended levels. KILLZONE Shadowfall was certainly a game worth playing, especially for fans of the genre and the series. It didn't set the world on fire, and there were many things it could have done much better, but all in all, it was a solid entry in the series. Number 29, DRIVECLUB. To this day, few games have come close to matching the outstanding visual fidelity of DRIVECLUB, which is high praise for a game that came out all the way back in 2014. One look at the game in action with rain pouring down your car's windshield is enough to blow anyone away, and while its visuals are surely its greatest strength, DRIVECLUB delivered in other ways as well, most importantly its tight driving mechanics. Of course, many racing sims, both before and after DRIVECLUB, have outclassed it in several ways. DRIVECLUB is far from a perfect game, but if you're a fan of racing sims, this is surely one you don't want to miss out on. Number 28, Days Gone. Sony Bend are dear to many PlayStation fans, and though they had certainly delivered some impressive games with Resistance Retribution, the desire to see them getting back into the big leagues with something of their own had been strong for a while. With Days Gone, this is exactly what they did. This is a game that continues to get better the more you play it. Technical issues, jank, and a feeling of been there done that are hard to shake in the early hours of Days Gone, but if you stick with it and push through those initial hurdles, you're rewarded with a large, immersive game. With a world that's bursting with reactive systems and a story that is much better than the initial impression it makes, Days Gone is surely a triumphant return to the spotlight for Bend Studio. Number 27, MLB The Show 19. It's hard to think of any annual sports sim franchise that's been as consistent for as long as MLB The Show has been. Like its predecessors, MLB The Show 19 does exactly what it should. It delivers a baseball simulation game with excellent, tight mechanics and high production values that capture all the pomp and flair you'd expect to see from a game capturing such a sport. Through smart refinements and solid new additions, it also improves on its predecessors in several ways to deliver what is possibly the best baseball game ever made. Number 26, Blood and Truth. More and more each year, the exciting potential of virtual reality comes into focus. Valve recently made massive waves with the spectacular Half-Life Alyx, but in the console space, Sony has been pushing for the technology for a while. Already, they've delivered some solid killer apps for PSVR. One of those is Blood and Truth, SIE London's cinematic first-person shooter. The game does suffer from some issues that VR games usually do, occasionally frustrating controls, awkward movement, but it's also a classic case of a game being greater than the sum of its parts. The bombastic Hollywood action keeps you engrossed in the immediate gameplay, while a surprisingly engrossing and pulpy story makes sure that you stick around to take part in the next big firefight. Blood and Truth is one of those few releases in recent years that have shown that VR games don't have to settle for mediocrity or small-scale experiences, and we hope we see more games in its vein soon. Number 25, Infamous Second Son. Infamous was a much bigger deal at the beginning of the PS4's life than it is right now, and as such, Infamous Second Son was a game many people were looking forward to. And while it wasn't the early PS4 killer app many were hoping it would be, it was still a damn good game. On top of being an absolute visual spectacle early on in the console's lifecycle, it was also a joy to play, with Delsin being a pleasure to control both in combat and for traversal, both of which were also backed up by thoroughly enjoyable mechanics. And while Second Son's story failed to make much of a mark, there's no denying that Delsin was an immediately more likable protagonist than the dry and dreary Cole McGrath. Number 24, Until Dawn. The interactive drama genre has made some major strides forward in recent years, and while games such as Telltale's The Walking Dead and Life is Strange are surely among the best this genre has to offer, another game that deserves to be mentioned in the same breath is Until Dawn. Supermassive Games was a relatively unknown quantity up until 2015, but with Until Dawn they finally had their time to shine. With its classic horror, excellent production values, and stunning visual fidelity thanks to the Decima engine, Until Dawn was definitely a showcase. If you enjoy horror or interactive narratives or both, do yourself a favor and don't skip this one. Number 23, Detroit Become Human. Speaking of interactive narratives, how can one possibly talk about the genre and not immediately think of Quantic Dream? They took the industry by storm in the PS3 era with Heavy Rain, and while Detroit Become Human didn't have that same impact, it was still yet another example of just what this developer is capable of. Detroit Become Human may have been clumsy in how it handled its themes, but it told a dramatic story through likable and excellently acted characters, and it told it very well. The weaving and intertwining stories of Kara, Connor, and Marcus had their ups and downs, but the net result was definitely positive. Number 22, Gravity Rush 2. Gravity Rush was an excellent debut for SIE Japan Studios' newest IP on the PS Vita and hinted at the exciting potential of its central hook of being able to manipulate gravity at will. Its sequel, made exclusively for the PS4, took that idea to its absolute limits, delivering what is probably one of the most underappreciated and unfairly overlooked games in the console's library. It exceeds expectations in every way possible. It is, of course, a joy to play, thanks to how it constantly makes use of its central mechanic in exceedingly clever and thrilling ways. Beyond that, there's a surprisingly engaging story here, told through the lens of an immensely likable protagonist. Add to the fact that the game is an absolute pleasure to look at, and what you have with Gravity Rush 2 is an unmissable gem. Number 21, Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. You'd have thought that Uncharted would have had some major growing pains after bidding farewell to Nathan Drake as a protagonist, but Chloe Frazier and Nadine Ross took to the spotlight like a fish to water. The Lost Legacy featured excellent combat and level design. It also continued to experiment with more open world-ish areas, and the results were just as successful, if not better. On top of that, with Chloe and Nadine in the driver's seat and Sam Drake lending a helping hand, the game also told an enjoyable story centered on excellent characters. Number 20, Death Stranding. Here's an understatement. Death Stranding is not for everyone. It is, by design, an unusual game, and it revels in being as weird as it is. From its setting to its world to its central gameplay mechanics, Death Stranding constantly does things that you wouldn't ordinarily expect AAA games to do. But if it manages to grab you, you're in for an unforgettable experience. Death Stranding makes traversal its central hook and weaves an intricate web of mechanics around that, all of which is strengthened further by the strong execution of its unique ideas for online play. It's a game that revels in downtime by making sure that literally every step you take is something you have to think about. As we said, this game is not for everyone, but if you're one of the people it is for, you'll agree with us when we say it's one of the best games Hideo Kojima has ever made, which is ridiculously high praise. Number 19, Yakuza 6: The Song of Life. Ryuga Gotoku Studio had the weight of a massive responsibility on their shoulders with Yakuza 6: The Song of Life. Saying goodbye to the Dragon of Dojima was certainly not going to be easy, and fans surely had high expectations for the final bow of such a beloved character. Building on the mainstream success they found with Yakuza 0, however, they absolutely knocked it out of the park with this final chapter in Kazuma Kiryu's story. Built on a new engine, Yakuza 6 was a very technically impressive game, while it also delivered the bombastic action of the series in spades. It was also a touching and memorable finale, with years of narrative culminating in a fittingly dripping climax. While we're very excited to see where Yakuza goes with the upcoming Like a Dragon, and whether or not Kiryu's shoes will be too big for Ichiban Kasuga to fill, one thing's for sure, the Dragon of Dojima will always be in our hearts. Number 18, Ratchet & Clank, 2016. Ratchet & Clank has been synonymous with PlayStation for a long time, and frankly, it's a little hard to believe that the duo showed up only once on the PS4. It's a good thing then that their sole outing on the console was such an excellent one. Part remake of the first game, part based on a movie based on the first game, Ratchet & Clank 2016 was a back-to-the-basics deal for the series in every way possible, and it worked. The chaotic combat, the tight platforming, the solid level design, the lovable characters, and of course an arsenal of ridiculous gadgets, this game delivered everything you wanted to see in a Ratchet & Clank game in spades. The fact that it looked almost like a playable Pixar movie was just icing on the cake. Number 17, The Last Guardian. Fumita Ueda and company have never failed to deliver generation-defining games, and with The Last Guardian, that is exactly what everyone expected them to do again. And thanks to multiple delays and the game's reveal and eventual release being separated by years of anticipation, those expectations only grew. The Last Guardian doesn't deliver on those expectations as convincingly as, say, Shadow of the Colossus did, but this game is the very definition of a flawed gem. Because sure enough, The Last Guardian is flawed, at times almost frustratingly so. But beneath those flaws is a game that tugs at our heartstrings and surprises you with its gameplay ingenuity time and time again. Whether or not The Last Guardian was worth the wait is a question that will have a different answer for every person. For us, the answer is an emphatic yes. Number 16, Gran Turismo Sport. Gran Turismo Sport came out at a time when Forza Motorsport was ruling the genre that Gran Turismo itself had dominated for so long. A disappointing launch certainly did Polyphony Digital's racing sim no favors, with its focus on online being one of the many issues people had with the game. But over time, the developers have turned this into a game worthy of the Gran Turismo moniker. With constant updates that have added several new cars and tracks, Gran Turismo Sport is packed full of content, while the core driving mechanics are undeniably some of the best we've ever seen in a racing sim. Sure enough, we're excited for Gran Turismo 7, and we're hoping it'll be a more traditional entry in the series, but in retrospect, Gran Turismo Sport turned out to be more than sufficient as a stopgap. Number 15, Judgment. Kazuma Kiryu had been the face of Yakuza since its inception, and his departure brought about nervousness and excitement for the future in equal measure. And while we waited for Yakuza 7 to give the series a fresh start, Ryu ga Gotoku Studio gave us Judgment and took us by surprise with how excellent the game was. Yagami proved to be a magnetic protagonist, surrounded by an ensemble of equally memorable supporting characters. Kamurocho was as much of a joy to explore as always, new investigation-focused mechanics melded with the classic brawler combat of Yakuza with surprising grace, and the story Judgment told was riveting every step of the way. It might just be a spin-off to Yakuza on paper, but we really hope we haven't seen the last of Yagami just yet. Number 14, Ghost of Tsushima. Sucker Punch started the generation with Infamous Second Son as one of PS4's first exclusives, and fittingly enough ended the generation with the console's last major first-party release. And with Ghost of Tsushima, they quite possibly also made one of their strongest games to date. As an open-world game set in Japan where you play as a samurai, Ghost of Tsushima scratches a number of itches all at the same time. And while its central gameplay loop is addictive yet formulaic, in other ways the game feels incredibly fresh. Exploring the island of Tsushima is a constant joy, not only because the game captures the feeling of wonder and discovery like few others do, but also because of how astoundingly beautiful its world is. It took Sucker Punch 6 years to make Ghost of Tsushima, and it's fair to say that by and large, it was definitely worth the wait. Number 13, Nioh 2. The original Nioh already got most things right the first time around, so all Nioh 2 had to do was stay the course. And by and large, that's exactly what the follow-up to Team Ninja's comeback game did. Like the first Nioh, Nioh 2 is their take on the Souls-like genre, and it is characterized by the same tense and punishing encounters, requiring finesse and mastery from the player, fearsome bosses inspired by Japanese folklore, and its multitude of interlocking systems and mechanics, with even more thrown on top in fact. The Soul Core and Burst Counter managed to greatly alter the flow of combat, introducing entirely new considerations and strategies for players, and doing just enough to keep Nioh 2 feeling less like a retread of its predecessor. Nioh 2 manages to deliver a fine game, and if there is any criticism that can be leveled against it, it's that sometimes it feels just a bit too familiar. At the end of the day, considering how good the first game was, that isn't such a bad thing. Number 12, Astro Bot Rescue Mission. ASTRO Rescue Mission is quite possibly one of the best adverts for what video games that properly leverage VR technology can be capable of doing. At its core, the game is a delightful platformer defined by tight controls, beautiful and vibrant visuals, and excellent level design that feels almost Nintendo-esque in how it keeps finding interesting new ideas and how it keeps getting the most out of them. And on top of that, this is a game that shows you just how much different it can make for a game developed by a talented team to be designed around the unique strengths of VR. Exploring every nook and cranny of every level in ASTRO Rescue Mission invokes a childlike joy the way few other games do. We certainly hope Sony makes more ASTRO VR platformers. Number 11, Nioh. Up until Nioh, the giant known as Team Ninja had been slumbering for a while. Though they'd certainly kept themselves busy over the years, they hadn't really delivered the sort of standout games that they had once been known for years. Nioh, a game that was in development for an interminably long period of time, was supposed to be their comeback story, and what a comeback it was. In an industry saturated with Souls clones, Nioh came along and managed to stand out in the crowd, thanks not only to its faster and more action-packed takes on Souls combat, and the grueling and ultimately immensely gratifying challenge expected from such a game, but also a rich setting that lent the game a flavor entirely unlike anything else. Number 10, The Shadow of the Colossus 2018. The legacy of The Shadow of the Colossus is insurmountable. Considered to be a true PS2 gem, one of the best games ever made, and one of the strongest arguments in favor of video games being art, this is a game that had a monumental impact on the industry. The prospect of being able to play it again, remade with cutting-edge visuals that could bring its hauntingly desolate world to life better than ever before, was a salivating one, and 2018's remake by Bluepoint Games delivered on that exciting promise with great aplomb. Exploring the world of Shadow of the Colossus is an experience unlike any other in and of itself, and seeing it rendered as beautifully it was in this remake was simply put a breathtaking experience. Of course, the stars of the show, the colossi that you spend the entire game hunting down, are even more impressive to behold, while the story, even though it embedded itself into our memories long ago, still manages to hit incredibly hard. Number 9, Dreams. Media Molecule did something truly revolutionary with Little Big Planet when they popularized and refined the play, create, share formula and made it abundantly clear that letting people make whatever the hell they wanted to was what they were put on this earth for. With Dreams, they decided to go all in on that and achieve predictably staggering results. Dreams does the impossible. It gives you limitless options to create any game, any virtual sculpture, any animated movie, any piece of music you can think of, with tools that give you unprecedented control over your creations. Impossibly enough, and this is the best part, it makes it all surprisingly accessible, with every tool, every command, every creation possible in the game following a logic that is not only easy to follow, but also a hell of a lot of fun to fiddle around with. It makes the act of creation a game unto itself. Dreams does something no game has ever done before, and we doubt any game in the future will ever be able to do it as well, even if they tried. Number 8, Horizon Zero Dawn. Making an open-world action RPG with a heavy focus on character and storytelling in a unique, rich setting is not exactly a logical next step for a studio that had only ever made linear first-person shooters set in grim and dark settings with uninteresting stories. With Horizon Zero Dawn, Guerrilla Games clearly took a leap of faith, and it paid off. Set in a beautiful, lush world with a story that grabs hold right off the bat and refuses to let go until the very end, told from the lens of a protagonist that's incredibly easy to root for, Horizon Zero Dawn is a masterpiece of storytelling. Meanwhile, with its thrilling combat against enemies that have some of the most imaginative and unique designs you will ever see, both from an artistic and mechanical perspective, it is also a joy to play through. No one could have expected Horizon Zero Dawn to be as good, as imaginative, and as captivating as it turned out to be, and every time we think of this game, we can't help but be immensely glad that Guerrilla proved us wrong so thoroughly. Number 7, Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. When Naughty Dog unveiled Uncharted 4 at E3 2014, they made a very bold but very clear statement. This was the last time Nathan Drake was going to star as the protagonist in an Uncharted game. Expectations following the announcement of a new Uncharted game would have been high regardless, but with that, they hit seemingly unreachable highs. Of course, Naughty Dog did as Naughty Dog does, and exceeded those expectations. Uncharted 4 managed to make out of it a grueling and tumultuous development cycle, and came out the other end an unabashed masterpiece. It took the parkour and action of its predecessors, and took them to their zenith, delivering what is probably one of the best, tightest third-person shooters on the market, while a greater focus focus on stealth as an option with the addition of much larger levels were also significant steps forward. And at the heart of it all was an incredible story with typically lovable characters. All of this coalesced to deliver possibly the best game in the series and a fittingly excellent send-off for Nathan Drake. Number 6, Marvel's Spider-Man. Insomniac and Spidey are a match made in heaven. From the moment the game was first announced at E3 2016, there were few who weren't absolutely convinced that it would be a dream come true, so the fact that Marvel's Spider-Man still managed to exceed expectations when it first came out is a testament to how great it is. Sure, it might have a pretty typical take on an open world design, and its side quests are far from the best, but when you're swinging through Manhattan at breakneck speeds and basking in the glory of the game's ridiculously fun traversal mechanics, it becomes really hard to care about all that stuff. And while traversal is definitely the star of the show, as it should be in a Spider-Man game, something that stands almost toe-to-toe with it is the combat, which takes the rhythmic, beat-em-up action of the Arkham games and puts its own unique Spidey spin on it. And with multiple suits to unlock, ingeniously designed gadgets to use, and so many skills to upgrade and master, Spider-Man also has surprising depth in its mechanics. On top of all that, the game also tells an excellent story, with its authentic and engaging portrayal of multiple classic Spidey characters, but a willingness to try new things that might surprise even the most hardcore Spider-Man fans in the best way possible. Number 5, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Remaking one of the most beloved games of all time invites a ton of skepticism regardless of who might be developing it, and that's something that was only doubled, to say the least, thanks to not only Square Enix's patchy track record in recent years, especially with Final Fantasy, but also their insistence on releasing the remake as an episodic series. Final Fantasy VII Remake had a lot to live up to, and quite a few hurdles to leap over, so the fact that it turned out to be so resoundingly successful in almost every way possible should tell you a lot about how good it is. It takes the cast of characters that have achieved the status of legends in the industry and portrays them with a perfect balance of being faithful to the original games and bringing in its own new ideas, which is something that it does consistently with its larger story as well. Best of all is the combat, which is a thrilling mishmash of pure out-and-out action and tactical strategy-based decision-making, simultaneously succeeding as a modern real-time action game and a new take on the original game's turn-based mechanics. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a game millions had been anticipating for over a decade. The fact that it lived up to those massive expectations is a monumental success in and of itself. Number 4, Persona 5 Royal. In 2017, Persona 5 managed to finally make this once niche but always beloved franchise break out in the mainstream. Where do you go from there? Atlus, as it turns out, had the answer. You go up, and that's exactly what Persona 5 Royal does. It takes the incredible base that the original Persona 5 release provided, sands out its not insubstantial flaws, makes changes where necessary, adds a whole lot of new stuff that enhances the experience further, and gets everything new that it attempts right the first try. Strikingly stylish, with universally empathetic characters, and a theme of rebellion and taking charge of your own destiny that resonates with everyone, Persona 5 Royal takes a very good game and polishes it into being one of the best ones ever made. It's the work of a development team at their creative peak, and it's really hard to point to any flaws that remain anymore. As we're sure you've noticed, most of this list is Sony first-party games. For Persona 5 Royal to not just stand among those games, but to tower most of them, says all that needs to be said about its quality. If you have not done so already, get out there and play this game. You'll fall in love and you'll never see it coming. Number 3, God of War 2018. Taking a tired series with rote gameplay and a protagonist who's become a parody of himself and deciding to reinvent it can almost be viewed as a fool's errand. Given that you'd have to change everything to catch people's interest, why even bother? But led by Cory Barlog, Sony Santa Monica decided to take on the unenviable task of reinventing God of War and making it exciting again. And boy, did they succeed. Rather than being unnecessary baggage that drags the game down, God of War's connection to the older games lends weight to its new arc, which is set in an entirely new world with an older, wiser, and less angry Kratos. God of War reinvented itself while still retaining the spirit of the older games. Visceral combat, gigantic vistas, all of that's here. What's also here is an emotional story of one man's quest for redemption, his growing bond with his son, and action-adventure trappings that finally make God of War's world something players can truly inhabit and explore, rather than being funneled down as they move from one fight to the next. Number 2, The Last of Us Part 2. Following up on one of the greatest games ever made is not an enviable task, but it's one that Naughty Dog was up to. And rather than playing it safe and making a game that would ride on the coattails of its beloved predecessor, with The Last of Us Part 2, Naughty Dog decided to challenge players' expectations in every way possible, and the game is so much better because of that. It tells a story that insists on defying expectations every step of the way and delivers one emotional gut punch after another, all of which is propped up by the high production values, excellent writing, and memorable acting performances that you expect to see in a Naughty Dog game. What's surprising, however, is that The Last of Us Part 2's gameplay is just as good as its story, if not better. Its stealth is dynamic and open-ended, its combat is tense and scrappy, its level design, which constantly leverages a much wider range of movement options, is sheer genius. All of this is grounded in a world that feels relentlessly brutal and yet incredibly believable. Suffice it to say, any questions we and others had about whether a sequel to The Last of Us should even exist have been conclusively put to bed. Number 1, Bloodborne. There was never any doubt what game would top this list from the moment we first started putting it together. There's a reason for that. Bloodborne is just that good. Even on a system that saw as many incredible exclusives from first and third parties alike as the PS4, Bloodborne reigns supreme. It is a stunning work of game design mastery, firing on all cylinders and sticking the landing on very literally everything it tries. From its haunting cityscapes to its cosmic horror monstrosities, from its deep lore that rewards the attentive player to its shockingly involved story, from its amazing combat to its incredible level design, which may just be some of the best we've ever seen in a video game, Bloodborne is well and truly a masterpiece, a work of art, a title unlike any other, and one of the best games ever made.
And that wraps it up. If you like what we are doing, please consider subscribing to our channel, and don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon. That way you will never miss out on any of our videos.